We're being told by people in conspicuous places, and the latest is really Mark Linus, the journalist who's very good at self-publicity, that we really need GM crops, genetically modified crops, and that without them that they solve all sorts of problems that we couldn't otherwise solve, and that without them we're all going to starve, and that people who oppose them must be some, Luddites or backsliders or, elitists or whatever. And all this actually is complete nonsense. And the people who are promulgating this stuff are either, they've just, it's vested interest, they're just pushing their own line, or they are simply badly informed, as I think is true of Linus. It looks as if, on the face of it, as if we have got a huge food problem, because we've now got 7 billion people in the world and 1 billion of them are chronically undernourished, and we're making a tremendous mess of the world in order to feed the 6 billion we are feeding. So it looks as if we've got a terrible problem. In fact, so we're being told by various government reports, the latest from the British government in 2010, that we need 50% more food by 2050 to cope with the rising numbers and to cope with increased demand and all that stuff. In fact, this is entirely untrue. The United Nations tells us that the world population will rise to 9.5 billion, in other words, quite a bit bigger than now, by 2050. But they also say that the world population will stabilise at 2050. So if we can feed 9.5 billion, that's it, that's the end of the problem, we can do that. And at the moment, we already produce enough food for 14 billion people, 1.5 times as much as we're ever going to need. And the reason that there now are deficiencies is that the food is badly distributed, it's produced in the wrong places, it's the wrong kind of food, and, for example, we now take the better part of the American maize crop, which is a hugely important food crop, and use it for, not even to feed cattle, but for biofuel, because there's more money in SUVs than there is in food. Now, these are the fundamental reasons why we now have a food problem, and increasing the total supply is not going to address that, it's not going to help. GM crops have been around for about 30 years. The technology has been around for about 40 years, but the actual crops have been around for about 30. In that time, they have produced nothing of unequivocal value, and nothing that could not have been produced, that is valuable, that could not have been produced by conventional means. Let me give a few quick examples. It is claimed in a general way, or it's sort of understood in a general way, that GM will increase yields. Well, there are trials in which it does. Sometimes a GM crop out-yields the conventional crop. But the real point is, can a GM crop out-yield a conventional crop or a traditional crop over a 10-year period, over a 20-year period, in real field conditions, where it's different from one year to the next, and you get extremes you didn't anticipate. There's no evidence that GM crops, food crops, have ever out-yielded ordinary crops over that time. It's claimed, for example, one of the great sort of flagship enterprises of GM was golden rice, rice enhanced with vitamin A, and that is justified on the grounds that 40,000 children a year are blinded because of vitamin A deficiency. So putting vitamin A into rice, a staple food, must be good, mustn't it? Well, no, not really, because actually vitamin A is nothing more than the pigment known as carotene, which is the orange pigment found throughout nature. It is one of the commonest molecules, organic molecules in nature. It's found in all dark green leaves, it's found in yellow fruits such as papaya, in yellow roots such as carrot and yellow varieties of cassava. If you practice horticulture, you will not be short of vitamin A. So the real question is not, why should you be eating nothing but rice that's been enhanced with vitamin A, but why shouldn't there be horticulture? In all traditional agriculture, there was always horticulture. So that's what we should be focusing on, not on this ludicrous enhancement, so-called, of vitamin A. And then there's a claim of rice. Then there's this claim, for example, that we cannot produce blight-resistant potatoes without GM. That's out there, we must have these GM potatoes. In fact, people are producing blight-resistant potatoes by conventional breeding, crossing, selecting. And there's no good just producing one in any case, because your blight organism constantly changes, constantly mutates. So you have to have a constant stream of different kinds of blight-resistant potato. And the only way you're going to achieve this is by conventional programs that are constantly turning out new ways of being resistant to blight. GM has nothing to add that is special to this general program. And of course, with GM crops, there are risks, and they're both ecological, what effect might the GM crops have on the world at large, and possible health risks, what effect might the GM crops have on us. Now, the advocates of GM have two kinds of answer to this. First, they say, well, we can anticipate the risks. We do all sorts of trials, We do field trials, and we haven't been able to show any real dangers in the wild. And we do health trials with rats and all that kind of stuff, and they don't keel over, etc., etc., etc. But this is nonsense. You cannot, in theory, or certainly not in practice, anticipate all the possible dangers that we could encounter. Partly because of matters of scale. You can't, in a field trial of a few acres over a few years, anticipate what might happen in all of nature over the next 100 years. But that's the kind of scale we have to be thinking about. But secondly, the advocates say, yeah, but look, okay, there might be small theoretical risks, but the advantages far outweigh the risks. So you've got to take some risk. Well, the advantages don't outweigh the federal risks, because there aren't any real advantages. The advantages are all imagined. And when we started with the sort of misconception or the lie that we need 50% more food, well, just not true. We started with the idea that GM will help us to produce 50% more food, just not true. And we start with the fact that we've never actually demonstrated that GM does anything particularly useful that couldn't be done by other means. So there's no real advantages, but we do know that there are lots of theoretical disadvantages and some real disadvantages. So why are we even talking about this subject? I think this whole GM episode demonstrates that we really can't continue to trust what might be called the powers that be. I mean, we've been given so much misinformation, either by people who are misinformed themselves or who are, for whatever reason, concealing what they know to be true, that we just can't trust them. What I think we have to do, actually, at this point, is to take matters into our own hands. We need nothing less than a people's takeover of the world's food supply. And this can, funnily enough, be done. We need more community-owned farms, more community-owned markets, and so on, and form a new network for producing and distributing food. And this is why a few years ago I and a few other people started the Campaign for Real Farming, which tries to do just this, bring about a people's takeover of world's food.